Hey friends, welcome to Social Videos. My name is Joan and today we're going to be making some shrink plastic DIY flower earrings. Now, I've been really into using shrinky dinks or shrink plastic to kind of try out some different DIYs and try some tutorials. And specifically, I came across these few TikToks that inspired me to try out making my own shrinky dink earrings, which look absolutely adorable. They're super aesthetic, super easy to make, and you need just the bare minimum of materials. These are perfect to make for yourself if you want to make them for a friend, or maybe with a friend. You can make matching pairs of earrings. Now I'll be showing two ways to make these earrings, which both actually are essentially the same ways, except that these earrings I made with a pre-cut template that I found at a store, and these ones are handmade. Albeit they do look a bit different, but I feel like you could definitely tweak it to make your own handmade ones just as good as these ones. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. Materials and timestamps will be found down below in the description. And with that, I think it's time to get on with the video. So let's go learn how to make some earrings. So obviously first we'll need some shrink plastic along with some jewelry craft pliers. I'm also going to grab some soft pastels for coloring. You'll also need for the jewelry making some earring hooks and some eye pins as well. Then you'll also need some scissors and a ruler along with a pencil. I also almost forgot, but you'll need a thicker sewing needle of some sort, some jump rings, and lastly an oven and some parchment paper. So for the first part of this video, I'm going to do the tutorial that's on the self-cut shrink plastic earrings, but again, if you want the ones that are pre-cut, feel free to skip ahead. So first to start, I'm just going to grab some of my shrink plastic. These are just some scraps I had left over. The shrink plastic that I use is glossy on one side, matte on the other, and should show up translucent. So first we're going to trace out our flower design. Now this part is kind of important because you need to get your measurements right. Different shrink paper is not going to shrink to the same size as others, but here I'm just showing some of the measurements that I made. But I would check the packaging for your shrink plastic for the most accurate measurements. Now for making the flower, I'm just making a 5-pointed flower, but one thing I would recommend is actually making it into 3. Later on in the video, you'll see why I recommend this, but I think 5 also worked out well if you do want to try it for yourself. Now after sketching out a design, here I am showing my measurements again. I tried my best to make the petals the same size and same length going out from the middle, along with the same width. When I'm happy with all of that, I'm just going to go ahead and cut my flower out. Now when cutting, I'd be a bit careful since the plastic is a bit brittle and it can snap pretty easily. So it makes it really hard to cut around sharp corners, but that is why my tip would be to cut starting from the outside of the plastic. That way you don't accidentally snap your petals off and it kind of makes cleaner, nicer cuts. To help with this, I would cut off my flower and just have it as a separate piece just to make everything a bit more easier. Once you're done cutting out your flower, you can now trim off the edges and kind of just smooth everything out. This just helps make sure edges and corners aren't too sharp and just kind of helps make your flower look a bit more uniform. Once you're happy with how the flower looks, we can then move on to making our second one. To make things easier and to keep your work more uniform, I'm just going to trace out the original flower I had and then repeat all the steps until we have our 2 flowers. And now it's time to make our leaves. So I'm just going to kind of sketch out this shape, again here showing my measurements. And I'm also going to make another one to finish off our 2 flower earrings. And now I move on to coloring, and I'm going to use some soft pastels to color in my flowers and my leaves. So if you notice on shrink plastic, there's actually 2 sides, a smooth side and a matte side. You want to make sure to color the matte side. Before I start though, I'm just going to erase any pencil marks from the tracing earlier, and I'm going to take this nice soft pastel and start outlining my petals. Now I'm going to put down my first layer and then smooth and smudge everything out with my fingers. My goal is to kind of get an ombre effect slash coloring, so I'm just going to keep layering on pastels on the ends of my petal. I'd also recommend coloring on a white piece of paper so you can actually see where you're coloring. And I'm just going to repeatedly color the ends of my petals and smudge it out with my finger, and as you can see here, there's kind of the ombre gradient effect I'm going for. Now it does look pretty faint, but once the plastic shrinks, the color gets a lot more saturated, so that's just something to keep in mind. Now I'm going to repeat that same whole process with my second flower. And though my fingers are now covered in blue, I now have 2 flowers that are ready to go. Before we can move on to shrinking anything though, we also need to color our leaves. So once again, I'm erasing any pencil marks and then outlining it with green pastel. And again, I'm smudging it out towards the middle for that ombre effect. And with that, we have our flowers and leaves ready to go. Before we can pop it in the oven though, we do need to puncture a hole in the middle, which is where our eye pin is going to go. To do this, I'm taking an embroidery or sewing needle and just pushing it through the plastic. It should be pretty soft, so it shouldn't be too hard to do. My only worry is making sure your hole is big enough so that when the plastic shrinks, your eye pin is still able to go through. To take care of this, I'm gonna push my needle through the plastic multiple times, and I'm also gonna shove a pencil tip or pen tip through it just to make sure that the hole is again big enough. And next we have to do the same thing to our leaves, but one thing is make sure you don't puncture your hole too close to the end of the plastic. This makes sure that after it shrinks, the hole is not too close to the edge and the plastic doesn't easily snap. Once we finish puncturing all of our holes, I'm just going to gather the materials I'll need next to put together the earring once we shrink the plastic. Heat is what's going to shrink your plastic, so we're going to need an oven and also some parchment paper to put on a pan. And I'm actually going to first touch on what not to do. This whole process was kind of tough for me to figure out, and I definitely ran into some bumps along the road. My first tip would be to not shrink your plastic altogether all at once. Oh no. So as you can see here, the flowers cooled down way too fast before they were still soft enough for me to shape them. So I'd recommend going one piece of plastic at a time. So for one of the methods that I found that worked was putting the eye pin in with one piece of plastic. This not only helps you get a better grip when you're trying to shape your flower and also makes sure that the hole is still there after it shrinks. However, warning, the plastic is gonna be super hot. It's like fresh out of the oven. Low-key was burning my hands here, so if you have a heat protectant glove, please use that. But I kind of just waited until it was cool enough for me to handle but still soft enough to shape, and just kind of slowly put it to the shape I wanted it to go into while holding the eye pin. The plastic cools pretty quick, and once it hardens, it's hardened. Don't try to force it, otherwise you're going to snap it like I did earlier. But ideally it should go into a closed flower shape just like this. Now I'm not gonna lie, this also took me multiple tries. I genuinely struggled, and it a lot of the time just hardened before I could make it into a good shape. I'm just sharing here my struggles. It's not as perfect as it looks, but I tried my best. So don't feel discouraged if it doesn't work the first time. Once you're finished with your flowers, however, you can move on to your leaves. Again, don't do what I did here and shrink both at the same time. I'd rather work with one at a time. I'm also making sure I have my tools ready, so when it comes right out the oven, I'm just puncturing it with my needle to make sure the hole is still there, and you can use pliers to hold onto the pieces of plastic to not burn your fingers off. And with that, we are finished with our plastic pieces and can put together our earrings. Now, an optional extra step is to use some sort of finisher, for example Mod Podge, to kind of put over your earrings. This gives it a nice finish and helps keep it strong. I just put a brush over this one as an example. But I'm just gonna go ahead and start assembling my earrings. So with my craft pliers, I'm gonna form a loop at the top of my eye pin. And for any extra wire, I'm just gonna loop it around the rest of the pin. And then taking some jump rings, I'm going to use that to attach the flower and pin part to the leaves and the earring hook. So again, using my craft pliers, I'm just going to open up my jump ring and attach everything together. So earring's going to go on, leaf is going to go on, and last but not least, the earring hook part. Then I'm going to close up the jump ring, and that's basically it for my handmade DIY flower earrings. Full final results at the end of the video, but if you're interested, I'm going to do a quick tutorial on the template cut shrink plastic earrings. Now, as you can see, the package comes with instructions, and the plastic itself is already pre-cut and pre-shaped. So I'm just going to pop out a flower or two and also a leaf. And if you're planning on following the tutorial earlier in the video using your hand-cut plastic sheets, feel free to use these shapes and sizes as reference. Now with your plastic, you'll be coloring on the matte side, not the glossy side. I'm going to be using soft pastels to make an ombre effect. Coloring on white paper also helps bring out the color. And for the leaf, I'm coloring the outside and the middle. And for the flower, I'm starting from the inside and kind of smudging outwards for the gradient look. Here I was going for a beige pinkish look, but feel free to be creative with what colors you end up choosing. And a tip for coloring is a little goes a long way, especially after the plastic shrinks. It's going to look a lot more saturated. Once we're done that, we're going to pop out the holes in the middle of the flower and on the end of the leaf. And then it's onto the oven where we're going to shrink our plastic. Now this is where it gets a bit stressful. You want to make sure that after you shrink your plastic, you move fast because once it cools, it is not shapeable anymore. So here I'm preparing all of the materials I'll need, pliers and some eye pins. And as that plastic comes right out of the oven, I'm going to be really careful because it is super hot, but the plastic cools really fast and that means it hardens really fast. So I'm going to be really speedy and kind of push together the petals, and this is going to form my closed bud flower shape. I'm going to make sure I'm pressing just enough to keep the petals closed and hold them there until they cool down and harden. Once they're not soft and bendable anymore, you have your flower charm. Next up is shrinking the leaf. So again, just going to pop that into the oven, and using my needle, I'm just going to puncture the hole and double check that it's still there. And personally, I wanted to shape my leaf, so I just tried holding it down with my pliers and my needle into kind of this curved shape just to make my earrings look a bit more cooler. So I'm going to keep putting pressure and hold that down until the plastic hardens, and then I'm done with my leaf as well. Now the final step is putting our earrings all together. So with my craft pliers, I'm going to make a loop at the top of my eye pin. I'm going to do this by twisting a loop, and then the leftover wire is going to loop around the rest of the pin. Very amateur looking, I know, but it kind of adds to the organicness of the vibes. I'm going to take a jump ring, open it up with my pliers, and then add on my earring, leaf, and earring hooks. Once I close up that jump ring, I am basically done with my earrings.